Sam Bright is a writer and editor. He has contributed to the BBC, The Guardian, Vice, The New York Times, and many more. He is currently the UK deputy editor for DeSmog. Today, we are going to break down the local election results. Sam, I am delighted that you joined me on Turn Left. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, it's been a busy few days, but yeah, happy to get stuck into it.
I can imagine. Tell me, what have you been working on the last couple of days?
Well, I'll be mainly, obviously just watching the results with a degree of horror filtering through, thinking how to unpick it all. I'm doing a piece for Novara, which should go out Monday on Reform's performance. So really like delving into whether the hype around Reform's performance is justified. So yeah, have a look at that if it's out when this is posted.
Yes, everyone, go make sure you read that article when it drops. Um, we are going to speak about different parties today, of course, but I am quite interested in speaking about reform, particularly on our channel. We've covered the Greens a lot. Again, we will speak about them, but I'm very much interested in reform. So before we get into the specifics, give me your general feeling of the local elections.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is obvious, but worth repeating. For Labour, it's a battering. They've lost a hell of a lot of seats. They've lost a massive amount of the share of their vote. It comes 2 years after a pretty sizable majority in the House of Commons. Given what we know about Starmer's administration already, it's a real kick in the teeth and might end up bringing him down. I think it's certainly like a staging post that we'll look back on as like one of the final nails in the coffin of the Starmer administration. In terms of the Greens, I think it just builds their momentum generally. I don't think it was like an overwhelming result necessarily, but I think it was incredibly positive for the Greens. I think it, compounds in a positive way what they did in Gorton and Denton. Obviously, the victory in Hackney was brilliant for them. And I think it just adds to this growing aura that Polanski and the Greens have. For the other two non-reform parties, we're talking obviously council, and we can go into the national results as well. But Lib Dems solid, didn't rip up any trees, but they performed pretty stably in areas that you'd expect them to win. The leafy anti-Brexit suburbs of London and the likes. And then the Tories, the Tories are trying to spin it as like, oh, we're on the rise. We're going to return to political prominence, and I think that is ambitious at best. Just because it's not as catastrophic as might have previously been predicted, doesn't mean that it was a positive performance. And then obviously we've got SNP entrenching their prominence in entrenching their position in Scotland, and I think the biggest story probably actually, and probably apt that we come to this last in the overview, but Plaid winning in Wales is a massive result, is a huge result. I think it's indicative of how politics is going in this country generally, this sort of split between the populist left and the populist right. And that's played out on a parliamentary level in Wales. And I've seen plenty of political commentators say this, and I'm in this camp as well, that I never thought that I'd see a Plaid government in Wales. The Welsh Labour Party has been one of the most successful political parties in the Western world. So it will be absolutely bloody fascinating to see what happens in Wales. And a real model, actually, I imagine, for the Greens of how they might seek to govern if they ever make it that far.
Wales was extremely fascinating, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute because it was a huge seismic victory. Even though it wasn't overall majority, but you got to respect the fact that yes, it was basically Wales and Labour were inseparable. But what I do want to ask you, though, is the political establishment love to make real big bombastic statements of every local election. They like to uh, quickly say that the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, whoever is in government, are facing crisis, no matter the size. So, for example, if we look at the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, now he never had losses like this. I mean, in some local elections, they gained 50 seats. Okay, not what an opposition wants to have. They want to see bigger gains. Or in local elections, they've lost 300. Right, and each time you would hear calls for Jeremy Corbyn should resign because he lost 300 seats when opposition parties should be growing. Yet, sometimes that feels a bit hyperbolic. But this time around, losing 1,500 seats, that is not overblowing it, I think, when I personally believe that this is an existential crisis for the Labour Party. Do you think this is off the back of a huge general election win? Granted, it was on a low vote share, that this is the end of the Labour Party as we know it?
I think it's too early to say definitively whether. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. One is that the Labour Party is in retreat to like a rump of its base. There's no doubt about that. And that is because British politics is so volatile at the minute. But it's precisely because of that volatility that I'm wary of saying this is the death knell of the Labour Party, right? Because I think things can change very quickly in British politics. I think it's certainly the beginning of the end of the Starmer administration. And it depends what they do next, to be quite honest with you. I think it's clear, and I think some people in the Labour Party have grasped this, though very few, it has to be said. The battle now, as I see it, is like people are despondent, they're angry, they're disillusioned with everything. And let's face it, from Brexit to austerity, back to the financial crash. People think that the way that the NHS is functioning, people think that Britain's broken, right? And I think the battle now is between those who blame immigrants and those who blame billionaires, to put it pretty simplistically. And we've seen in New York, we've seen elsewhere across the globe, and that this is the great divide, and this is the way that you energize people on the left, is by blaming the super rich, because it is their fault fundamentally. We're just telling the truth by saying that. It's the fault of big corporations, it's the fault of private equity and asset management firms, these sort of corporate predators, these capitalist predators that have harvested so much of our national wealth, and fled with it to offshore tax havens. They need to be held to account. And the thing is that the successor to Starmer needs to make that argument convincingly in a way that galvanizes people. And I think there's basically, as far as I see it, one person in the Labour Party who's capable of doing that, and that's Andy Burnham. Because I think Andy Burnham's got that sort of man of the people feel around him, the way that he stuck it to Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson during COVID, the way that he's represented Manchester on a national stage, and we can get into the nitty gritty of the policies in Manchester, whether they've been left wing enough, but the renationalisation of the bus network, for example. I think Burnham versus Farage, Burnham can win, and he can make a left wing case pretty convincingly, actually. The question is whether institutionally the Labour Party is capable of doing that. And given what we've seen recently, the sort of technocratic, staid, slow, unresponsive way in which Starmer is governed, and I think that rot goes pretty deep in the Labour Party, I wouldn't be surprised if they pick a different route and do come close to maybe not annihilation, but being replaced by the Green Party as the left wing option for British voters. I think it is, as you say, an existential moment for Labour, but they have a chance. They do have a slender chance to regain some sort of authority on the left if they choose their next leader correctly.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, undoubtedly, their best bet is Andy Burnham. I think we can all understand that. But the question is not whether he can improve Labour's chances. I think he will. It's whether the internal machinations will allow it. And to be honest, it doesn't feel like a question because we've seen that play out when it comes to the Gorton Denton by-election. I mean, some people argued that the Greens would have still won because it was such a big majority, but it was certainly would have been their best chance to keep the seat if Andy Burnham was there. They've outright, at least the Starmer project, have outright stopped them happening through fear of him being replaced. Let's park Labour because I feel like the big headlines from the local elections, everyone's kind of correctly predicted because it was quite obvious what's happening. Labour big losses, Reform the winners of the day, and the Greens doing very, very well. But I want to talk to you about Reform because you're going to offer a more of a deep dive, something a bit more nuanced than what maybe the headlines are saying. So talk to me about Reform. Do you think the way in which the media have portrayed this as a massive... I mean, we can't understate the fact they won 1,500 seats. Absolutely true. Is there more nuance to the fact that this has been an incredible victory for them?
Oh yeah, hugely. It has not been. They've not. I mean, Farage has used this phrase repeatedly over the past few days that they walked it in various places, if not nationally, and that's just not the case. That's not the case at all. Yes, they are in the ascendancy politically. There's no doubt about that. But there are plenty of signals that this did not go as well for Reform as they had hoped, and certainly as has been written up by the media. So take it back 12 months last year. I mean, this is the thing about British politics. It's difficult remembering like 4 weeks ago, never mind
True.
12 months
It
ago.
happened so fast, doesn't it? Yeah.
So far, exactly. And I think this stands to Reform's benefit in the political context that we're in. Because for one, we can't remember the dodgy thing that Farage did, the millions of quid that he accepted a couple of months ago. So he gets away with it often. But cast our minds back 12 months to the last local elections, and Reform won 30% of the vote in those elections. People, I remember seeing projections where they sort of map out how constituencies may swing at the next general election, and it was basically all turquoise. There were projections of a landslide Reform victory, reducing every other party to single digits and, having a supermajority if they built on the success of the last local elections. If they progressed from 30 to 35 towards 40 and all the other parties were sat in the mid-teens, then, you'd have Farage goose-stepping his way towards Downing Street in no time. But what's actually happened is that Reform have gone backwards. Reform are in reverse. They polled this year at 26%, so down from 30 to 26. And of course, that's higher than any other party. But it's a clear direction of travel. And it shows that the party's not building momentum. It's not solidifying its support. There's actually a risk of it dipping back towards the rest of the group, the other challengers, and it basically being like a 5 to 7 way political melee with everyone being sat between essentially 12% and 20%. If Reform dip another 4% next year, they'll be on 22%, and the other parties will be grabbing at their heels. So I think to put it, not just me saying it as well, but the pollster Peter Kellner, who used to run YouGov, one of the most respected polling companies in the country. He said prior to the elections that if Reform won 1,400 English council seats, it would be a disaster. That's a direct quote. He said it would be a disaster. And they only just won more than that. So, based on his metrics, it's somewhere between disaster and disappointment for Reform. And, we've seen it plastered across every media, including the BBC, that it's been an overwhelming success for Reform. And that's just not the case whatsoever. We've gone from Reform supermajority territory to, if the results played out at a general election, they wouldn't win a majority. They need the Tories to prop them up, or there'd be the chance of a progressive coalition to challenge them. So you add that to all the scandals of recent weeks, the racist candidates and the dodgy donations and Farage walking back, even the few um, nominally left-wing policies that he had. And I think actually the signs aren't great for reform. If only the rest of the media would realise it.
It's true. I mean, I think I've also been speaking about the Reform Party losing their source. For me, maybe I'm a pessimist here, but I tend to think reforms seem to be the most likely to win the next election. Although political predictions are probably not the best thing to do. What is absolutely true, though, is there was an aggregate of polling showing reform as their base at 30%. I mean, we were saying 31%, 32%, and not just having quite a high percentage of the vote, but everyone else is blown out the water. Um, and then we did see a dramatic drop where, I mean, again, it's only just one poll. We take it with a pinch of salt, in which you had the Green second with 21% and Reform on like 23, 24%. You can see a real, the gap closing there. When and why do you think that happened? I mean, I've got my views, but I'd be interested to know for you, what period do you think this started to happen, and what were the biggest things that maybe reform have got their base but haven't reached out across to try and get like a majority sort of territory? When did this happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it seems based on the polling to have happened essentially over the past 12 months, the party has slipped. I think part of it is like an avalanche effect, like a snowball effect, where there's this accumulation of negative stories. And with reform leading in the polls, it's kind of the eye of the public is increasingly trained on reform, what their policies are, how they're conducting themselves. I think a lot of what they've done on the like asylum and immigration front, Farage has obviously been an abhorrent politician promoting some of the cruelest policies on this front for decades. But I think in terms of like the detail of how bad it would be, um, that's reached a new level for me over the past like 12 months. And it's just been epitomized over the past week with them saying that they'd put essentially like internment camps in green constituencies. And it seems as though he just wants to punish left-wing voters now, and certainly those who are considering the Greens. And that's going to drive away, a segment of his support that was probably considering him before this moment. And I think the immigration stuff as well, I think it's deeply unsettling to the average voter. I think that it's un-British. I think that people think it lacks decency, it lacks morality, it lacks fairness. And I think even like moderate conservative voters are quite squeamish about that sort of
Yeah.
thing. And then the fact that they absorbed, you know, the very people who'd created the mess that they're campaigning against, absorbing Jenrick and Braverman, and before that, Lee Anderson and Danny Kruger. And it just seems completely implausible to pitch yourself as this sort of upstart, this rebellious insurgent force in British politics when you've got smarmy Robert Jenrick, who used to be in the Home Office, complaining about immigration numbers. I think a lot of what they've done is incoherent and quite farcical on a political level and divisive. And then you layer on top of that the Trump links. It's almost surprising that Farage hasn't been damaged more due to his MAGA associations. And I think it's funny, you layer all those things on top of each other, it's striking the lack of coverage that those things have got. And I think it will increasingly erode his support. And I won't be surprised if we're seeing a position in 12 months where the Greens and Reform are quite a neck and neck in the polls, to be honest with you, depending on what happens with Labour leadership. Yeah, I'd say those were the key things. What were you thinking with the?
Well, I agree with a lot of that, and what I find so fascinating about reform is I think at one time Nigel Farage understood the country, and he didn't sort of, he wasn't Twitter brained, to want for a better phrase, in which he almost grabbed the popular opinion, because I think when it comes to the left, when it comes to economic policies, majority of Brits agree with us. I think when it comes to nationalisation, when it comes to minimum wage, wealth taxes, etc., right? People in this country understand there's a wealth gap, there's the super rich, they don't like it, and they don't like privatization. They've seen that, right? But of course, I think a lot of people would still say we need to control immigration, or I think like the most average coded response on immigration is, as long as you come here, you work hard, you pay your taxes, fine. I've got a problem with illegal immigration, not legal immigration. I think that's like the average opinion. And what we've seen from Farage is they've got, or the Reform Party, they got high off their own supply, in which they became a party which they wanted to impress Twitter over the average person. And maybe it's through Rupert Lowe and Restore, where they're now talking about legal immigration. They're talking about indefinite leave to remain. And there are many immigrants, or second generation immigrants, who would gravitate towards reform, who are like, I'm the good immigrant, right? I'm fine with reform. It's the illegals I have a problem with. Who are now thinking, oh, he wants to go for legal migration. I'm not sure about that. And I think there's that sense that seems a bit cruel. So they've gone, I think, too far in immigration. And to go from pretending to stand with unions, saying you're gonna nationalize steel, to then making a speech, I think, at the end of last year, essentially saying we're gonna implement austerity because the economy's so bad. And even their quasi-populist cut taxes policy, I don't believe in that, but that's a populist policy. They've now rolled back on that. And they're making policies which you mentioned about putting concentration camps in green areas. That is so Twitter brained and MAGA coded. Of course, then it comes to the links to Donald Trump. Then it comes to the fact that they really early on cheered on the war in Iran before realizing people don't want that and energy bills have gone up. It feels like at one time, Farage really grappled the mood of the nation and maybe got too confident, and maybe his advisors have been looking too much on Twitter and making policies that get a bunch of likes on Twitter, but the average person goes, wait, you want to put detention camps in only green areas? That seems quite fucked up.
The question for me is like, is this his advisors or is this just Farage?
Interesting.
Because because if you think about Farage as a political player over the past like 10, 15 years, he's always been like this lone wolf, very happily a lone wolf as well. Like he loves scrapping on the margins of politics, like acting as a battering ram for his, particular cruel ideas on Britain. And he's not used to this. He's not used to having to think about a broader audience or broadening his audience or, appealing beyond his base. He's essentially wanted to create a MAGA style cult and he's been relatively successful at that. But he's been happy at best getting 15% of the vote. That's Farage's comfort territory where it's him versus the world, it's him versus the establishment, and he's got his like super fans who will cheer on his every win, basically. And I sort of wonder whether over the past year or so, 18 months, where he's tried to be more of a, a cautious, a strategic politician, whether he's just thought, I don't want to do this. Like, this isn't my happy place. I want to be the Farage of old who, says whatever comes into my mouth. And I think as a result, you've gone from, cautious Farage, strategic Farage, getting 30% of the vote, to now increasingly, as you say, just appealing to the Twitter crowd, the X crowd, and you're starting to see his polls slipping back towards the original Farage level of like old UKIP days of like 15%. This is a feature of Farage's projects in the past that he's not happy with sharing the limelight and
Mm.
he's deeply paranoid about people stealing his throne, and you'll have that combination of um, big egos, declining poll ratings, and then Farage being sensitive about anyone challenging his supremacy. And I could see it very easily sort of snowballing towards chaos.
I think they've potentially showed their hand too quickly. And maybe, to be honest, I mean, part of what you're saying is potentially convincing me to be a little bit less doomerist, and maybe it is just a UKIP phenomenon. I hope so. Um, I want to quickly talk about the Greens for a second. Some polling showed, I mean, particularly Stats for Lefties said they could get up to nearly 700 seats. I think they got just over 400 in total. They got over 500. Certainly in areas like Hackney, really impressive wins. Zoe Garbutt becoming the new Hackney mayor. You got Manchester, formerly a Labour stronghold. They were doing well there. Expected to do well in the south. But was this an underperformance, an overperformance, or just about right? What are we looking at here? Are we looking at a Green Party that, yes, may gains, but are they a serious electoral force yet? Or does this have maybe hints of them potentially becoming a serious electoral force? What are your views on the Green Party in the local elections?
I think this is signaling that they're becoming a serious electoral force. I think there's a few things to say. I think they performed basically where their polling suggested that they would, right? So like middle teens, like 13, 14%. But if we think back like a year, 18 months, you wouldn't have had the Greens anywhere near that. So this was them cashing in their chips of like a really good last few months. And this stuff doesn't happen overnight. Like reform has taken years to build to this position, and I think it will be similar for the Greens. They've got to consolidate. The British political system often it operates in a way that like it's kind of like I hate to say this in the context of the Greens, but it's like a gateway drug in a way. Like you vote for them, you vote for them once,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, I've kind of broken the seal. I'm going to
Yeah,
do
they're
that again and
comfortable
again and again.
voting for them again. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and they become a viable option. You know, a party that's challenging in lots of different constituencies. You know, you get to a base level, and then you build beyond that. And I think they've won impressively in a bunch of areas, but they've also built bases in a lot of others that then come next year or come a couple of years, they'll build upon hopefully with good strategy. Um, I think the thing for them is also how they respond to Labour's moment now as well. And I think the Greens' success relies very heavily, I would say, on what Labour does next, to be honest. If
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's just like Starmer 2.0 and where Streeting gets the Labour leadership, perfect for the Greens. Absolutely perfect for the Greens. Um, and I think there's a thing with this as well in that there's a great sort of aura energy around the Greens at the minute. I think in one way that's brilliant, but only if you can sustain it. And we are quite a few years from a general election. And I think the trick for the Greens now will be, especially as the attacks from the media ramp up, will be how do we ensure that that doesn't dissipate, that we manage to make sure that people are just as excited about voting for us in 2029 or 2028, whenever the next general election happens, as they are right now. Because it does seem as though we're in a green moment, and they've got to make sure that that moment stretches beyond just a couple of by-election victories and, you know, a poll boost. They've got to really put in some hard yards, and I think they've got to be as strategic as reform is trying to be in terms of broadening that base, in terms of, and I don't think Corbyn did this well enough in terms of neutralizing attacks of the media, not giving a scrap of meat for the Times, for the Telegraph, for the GB News to hold on to try be as squeaky clean as possible. Um, because I think it's a bit, um, I don't know, it's a bit hindsighted to say after you've lost, oh, it was the media that did it.
Yeah, a lot of us did that. We were like, oh, you know, the media did this. Sure, the media had a part to play, but you need to look at your own mistakes. And again, it's hindsight. I do think Zach is handling the media better. I spoke to a few candidates on the ground. They said that the attacks, the crazy attacks we saw in the last week, didn't come up on the doorstep. What's your view on the media attacks against Zach Plensky? Like, do you think it made absolutely zero impact? Do you think they could have maybe got a few more Labour votes had it not been for the attacks? Because I think most of their support comes from alienated Labour supporters, and they just need more people to jump ship. Do you think the attacks had a bit of an impact, but maybe not so worrying?
Yeah, I do. I think that it probably pulled down the green ceiling a bit. I do. And I think a lot, as I say, a lot of the thing with the Greens is like this momentum, this energy, this like sense of them being different in many ways and being like doing politics properly. And I think some of the stories, and you know, just to be clear, like some of the fucking, I think, as is often the case, a lot of the media attacks were just completely unsubstantiated and ridiculous, quite frankly. And I think, to its credit, I think the public can see through those sort of things. I think that some of the stuff that the Green Party's candidates were reported as having said were absolutely abhorrent. You know, reform are pretty horrendous on this front as well, and perhaps doesn't get the coverage that the Green stuff did. But I think the fact is that, you know, objectively it was terrible, some of the things that the Green candidate said, and I think that the moment at which it hit the Greens and it hit the news, I think it potentially inflicted maximum damage because people were just going to the polls. And I think, as I say, in the context of like Polanski being this guy who's calling out like a rotten establishment, I think that as a result, you've got to be even cleaner than
Yeah,
you
yeah.
think you've got to be. You've got to tread so carefully. Um, and I think he's got to like drum that into his party from top to bottom to make sure that like if we're going after them, they can't be coming after us on the same basis as we're attacking them, or else we're just going to be seen as business as usual. We're going to be seen as like the same as the rest of them. And as soon as the Greens are painted in that light, they'll suffer electorally. I think that the big selling point for the Greens and why they're so refreshing is that like thank God there's an alternative that's calling out, like, as you say, like the inequalities, the vast inequalities in British society, the dodgy donations to political parties, is actually communicating with people on a level that they understand and they relate to, and they've got good candidates who, you know, aren't just like consultants and advisors. Um, but you've got to make sure that that is like, that's the personality, that is the character, that is the fundamental character of the party. And obviously, like you're putting forward like thousands of candidates potentially at local elections, and they're always going to be rotten apples. But I think the key thing is like dealing with it as quickly as possible. Like as soon as these things come out, you've got to be like, that's abhorrent what they said. Unequivocally, we distance ourselves from it. They're banned. Like they're out. I think you've got to take a no nonsense approach to it, or else, yeah, it will hurt them.
Yeah, I think there's only some amount of times you could probably say, well, we were a small party, now we're a big party, we're developing our vetting process. I think that's fine to say, but after maybe a year or so, it might not be so good. I'm almost glad as well the Met Police stuff happened now rather than near a general election, although I'd rather it didn't happen at all. It's those sorts of things you've got to be really politically switched on. Just to round it off, quickly talk about Plaid. Extremely fascinating, and as you said at the beginning, You couldn't separate Labour from Wales and Wales from Labour, yet we seen an astonishing result for Plaid Cymru. We see in Scotland and Wales the quote unquote progressive nationalism, whereas in England you see the reactionary nationalism. Some people would probably have a go at me and say nationalism, nationalism, but I digress. SNP want self-determination. Plaid is about Plaid. Reform ran a campaign. Let's be honest, the one trick pony is immigration. I think a lot of people in Wales are thinking, well, to be honest, we've been let down by the British state and the British establishment. I don't think immigration really washes like it does in England. Talk to me about Wales. What is it you think? Why were Plaid so successful? And yes, Reform made gains, but at one point the polls were neck and neck. But Plaid managed to beat the Reform argument that immigration is the biggest issue.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that one thing to say is that Wales generally is a more progressive nation. I mean that probably from an economic sense, than a sort of from a cultural and social policy aspect. Historically, left wing, as we say, like has voted Labour for donkey's years. So I think that Plaid's sort of left wing populism was sort of to a degree always inevitably going to appeal more in that context than in the English context. Um, I think it's staggering the disintegration of Welsh Labour, and I think it speaks to people's. I mean, this is the thing. We talked about Brexit, 10 years ago now, as being like the pinnacle of political
Kind of
disillusionment.
scares me that you said 10 years ago now, actually, when you say
I know,
Brexit.
it
Yeah.
is, isn't it? Like, oh my god! And British politics, we still got Farage,
We're
like
still there. Still there, yeah.
still there. Unfortunately, we don't have Boris anymore. But anyway, I think it's worth saying in the context of reform that Nigel Farage is deeply unpopular. His poll ratings are almost as bad as Keir Starmer's. Can you believe it? Like, and I think it's Welsh Labour's disintegration speaks to that because people have no loyalty anymore towards political brands. Like, as we saw during the 20th century, people were very attached to political parties. It was almost part of like, their personalities and their sort of the way in which, families operated, the sort of pride of voting for a particular party. And people don't have that anymore. And I think that um, Plaid benefited from that massively. Reform are benefiting from that massively across the UK. But I think in the Welsh context, for me, it's a seismic victory for Plaid, but it's also a moment of extreme danger for them because they're going to have to do stuff quickly to improve people's lives and to communicate with people while in government, while being seen as the establishment, because they've got their hands on the levers of power now. They've got to communicate in a way that still embodies a sort of insurgent left wing, as you say, like pro Welsh attitude. That's convincing to people that make sure they stabilise their vote. Because if they don't do that, people are so disloyal to political parties now, they will quickly move somewhere else. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those Plaid voters were actually considering voting for Reform because people just want change. And Plaid and Reform were the two change options in Wales, one on the left, one on the right, but they were broadly put into the change bucket of like, let's do something completely different. And Plaid appealed, I think, more to that kind of left wing unifying aspect of Welsh politics and the Welsh character. Um, but in also this also applies to the English context of like if Reform wins nationally, that doesn't mean that we're going to have Reform in government for decades, or that Nigel Farage is going to be consummated as king. I think we could very quickly see in every political context, Starmer's the same, that trust and faith in a government, in an administration, um, can bleed dry very quickly, alarmingly quickly, actually, I would say. I'd almost say that the British public, for all their rightful anger in the system, almost are not giving politicians any time whatsoever to fix quite fundamental problems that have gone back not just decades but generations. And I think that presents quite a distinct danger of bad actors marshalling that anger for their own ends. I think in some cases it works to the benefit of left wing parties, as we see in the Plaid context, and in some cases it works um, to the benefit of the likes of Farage. I think that's probably the story from these elections, to be honest with you. And the question for me, the big question that I don't know the answer to, is it capable for any party now to regain voters' trust in a government, an administration, in the establishment, in whatever form it takes? And I think if the answer to that is no, that is actually quite a scary prospect, because even when left wing parties enter government, you need them to have a degree of goodwill from the public to then carry out those policies, or to make mistakes and to come back and to revive themselves and to, to win a second term so they can build a systemic change that the country needs. And I think that's a massive thing that I'll be looking out for in Wales. Like, can Plaid hold its base, or is it just going to collapse in the same way that Labour did? Yeah, that is like one of the most interesting things for me.
I think that's a really good point. I agree with that because I think it is dangerous when people lose faith with governments, because in order to fix the decades-long crisis we've had, you have to have a theory of change that far extends beyond 5 years. And I think the problem there is it's almost a vicious cycle. People don't believe in governments; they want to see immediate change, and therefore politicians are drawn to making quick fixes because they're worried that if they don't deliver results, even though you might be like, look, this has got to be a 15-year project. If you want to reverse Thatcherism and neoliberalism, you can't do that in a year. But the problem is, if you don't do anything in a couple of years, people become quite angry. I think the Labour Party have gone in the wrong direction. I don't think that, like, if you had 15 years, then they suddenly have transformational change. But that's the difficult thing we're in, and I agree with you that it's quite dangerous. And also, you're absolutely right when it comes to lack of party loyalty, and I think that does come from the fact that, like, the Labour Party was so obsessed about appealing to the Conservatives, not just ignored their base, but shat on their base. Well, guess what? If you bring in Conservatives, if they lend you your vote for an election, they can leave just as quickly, whereas your base are the ones that tend to forgive you, which they've completely alienated. I would love to continue this conversation. It's really fascinating. Well, we speak for nearly 50 minutes. Sam, an absolute pleasure for you coming on Turn Lab. Thank you so much.
No, it's been great. It's been great. It's almost cathartic to talk through everything that happened.
Yes, it's nice to not try and deal in Sam bites and having back and forth quick arguments. It's nice to really dissect it. I'd love to have you on again. Tell me about your work again and where people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, do check out DeSmog, where we do a lot of deep dive investigations into Farage and his cronies. I also run a Substack which does much of the same thing, but is more analysis based. So yeah, do have a look out for me there.
We'll make sure to link that in the description so people can find that. Again, Sam, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Cheers.